Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at Gmail in Python. And Gmail is one of the largest mail providers in the world. And as a result, it has an API that you can use to interact with your mail. And so the first thing you actually need to do is to allow the person or the application to interact with your emails. So in this diagram here, you are the client. And when, for example, you log into a third-party application, does Google provide the option for you to log into other sites with Google? You click login, and then it gives you this thing, and it says, "Do you give this application permission to do the list of things it describes here?" And because this little section is run by Google's server, then they put exactly what the person who is running this application will be allowed to do. And then you can look at those and say, yeah, that's okay. And so if it says, it wants to view your email address, you might say, oh, that's fine. But if it says it wants to send emails, delete emails, and read all your contacts, you might decide to deny it. And so if you click deny, you get this token. And then whenever you make requests to, for example, read the name of your email address or send an email, then you have to provide this token. And this resource server will carry them out if the token's valid. And you might request some data back, such as a list of things in your inbox. And that means that these resource servers and the authorization servers are going to be communicating with each other to make sure that the token is valid. And if, for example, I say I just want to view your email address, but then decide to try sending emails on your behalf, then the token will still be valid, but it won't give me sufficient permissions to do that action. And so the authorization server will say, no, you can't do that. Another thing is that the Gmail uses an API, and this means that we're not actually communicating with the mail server. So in the previous case, we jumped straight from our app, which wasn't in a browser, to the web server, and then we logged in, and we were sending emails using SMTP, and so we could run SMTP commands. But in this case, we request to the API itself, and the API deals with the web server and database. So before we do anything, there are actually some fairly complex libraries we need to install. Because the names are quite long, I've created this requirements.txt file. So you can just pip install -r and then requirements. And you'll see, everything is already installed for me. And then we've got this email here, which has loads of CSS and HTML. And that just generates this. It's a very simple email with an image. And it's worth noting that the image is linked to a specific file rather than me having a local file which I'm sharing. And then a lot of it is a lot like sending our old email. So we actually need to import some stuff from the email library to create the message we're going to send. And we're going to import my multipart. And because this is focused more on the Gmail side, we're just going to create and send a simple email. But you can look at the one with more details about how to send, for example, attachments in the previous video. So then we need to, from the auth library.flow, we need to import this install app flow, and this creates an app flow where you're allowed to log in. We need to be able to make a request, and we need to be able to use OAuth 2, and we need to build some credentials. So you can see that's quite a lot of imports. And OS. So the top three are for creating the email and eventually base64 encoding it. These are all Google specific libraries to interact with their API. And then Json OS are kind of utility libraries. I've also got here this settings.json, which I'm not going to open, which contains some personal information so that I can run this code without you seeing some of the properties I'm using. And we'll just save those in settings. So now everything is set up. We've got our imports and we've got the data here. And I'm just going to drop this, close that so that I've got more space on the screen. The next thing we need to do is we need to define our scopes. And it turns out that there's a single scope that we can use for both of the operations we're going to be performing. And that is gmail.compose. And this gives us permission to compose emails and also to view the name. And when I log in, it will come up with a list of things that I'm allowed to do. Then there'll be some credentials, and currently we haven't got any credentials. So we actually need to check if our token file exists. And if so, then we will just load those, because we don't want our users to log in every time if they don't need to. And the file name is token.json, and we want to specify the scopes. But, we might not have credentials, or they might not be valid. So they might be old, I might have created them a year ago and only come back once. And so one thing we can say, if we do have credentials and they're expired, then we can refresh with a request. And this means if we do have credentials that have expired and we have this ability to refresh them, then we can just do that. Otherwise, we have to get our users to log in. Maybe it's the first time they've used it. We have an installed app flow, and you can see we need to specify all of these. And it's from this secrets file which I've created. And my file is called credentials.json, and I created this by creating an application. And I'll put a link to explain how you can do that, because that's on the Google server side. And then we can take our flow that we've just created and run a local server. And I set the port equal to 0. And that means it will come up with a local application asking me to log in. And then we'll want to actually save this token. And so we'll just write credentials dot to JSON. So we can now save these, and next time we log in, it jumps to this step and it works. And then finally, we want a service, and so to do that, we actually need to build Gmail, specify this v1 because the API levels, and we'll use the credentials as those creds that we've just created. And that gets us to log in. So now we can run this. And you see that authentication is complete. And that is because I have used this before, and so I know that it will quickly log me in. However, first time you run it, you'll probably get an option that looks very similar to when you sign up to a website and it says, do you allow Google to do you allow this app to do all these things on your behalf? So usually in the previous video, I say create the email and then log into the server. But in this video, I think it's better to log in first and then create the email. Because if the person decides, no, they don't want you to be able to do all those things, then there's no point generating an email for them. Then we're going to create our email, and we need to load this email.html file. And I set the encoding equal to UTF-8, just in case there are any characters that aren't ASCII. And I say the message is MIME text. It's the file.read, and this is an HTML file because we don't want to send plain text emails to people. So we then need to set the to, and that's the settings, receiver, and then we want to set the message from, and finally the message subject. and this will just be a Python test email, so that when it comes up in my inbox, I can check that it's worked. And then we want to say the message from is the service we've created .users.get profile, and I want to set the user ID equal to me, saying it's my account. You can use other accounts if you have permission to, and the email address. And if I run this, then I can paste this here, and instead of getting the email address, I can show you the keys. And so the things that are sent back in the response to this are the email address, the total number of messages, the total number of threads, and the history ID. And then the final step is just to send this email. So we need to encode it, and we use base64.url safe b64 encode, and that's because this actually calls a web API. So it needs to have a URL safe value, so that when it calls it, it doesn't mess up the query strings. Then we want to convert the message as bytes, and we decode it, and then we take our service.users.messages.send, and again we set the user ID equal to me, and the body is this dictionary which has the raw, and the raw message is our encoded message, and we just execute. And we do that, and it looks like nothing has happened because I haven't done anything with the response, but I can just check my phone and see that the message has come through and it has all worked. So you can see that sending emails with Gmail is very useful. It's quite cool. It's not particularly difficult, but the login can be quite a lot of things to remember. But the good news is that it's the same login for all of Google's APIs. So if you learn it once, you can use it many times. So hopefully you'll be able to automate some of your Gmail emails, not the kind of large-scale mass unsolicited emails, but maybe the weekly email you need to send to someone that you don't want to type out every single time. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, learned some cool stuff, and I'll see you again same time next week. Till then.